Oh, yes. This is the month that Centers for Spiritual Living is talking about integrity. Integrity is what you do when nobody's watching. That's really the measure of our values. And what I find is that sometimes it is difficult for us to live from the values we want to claim when we have a long history of doing something different, because we find that we do it without even awareness that we're doing it. Does that ever happen? I did this morning. We were getting ready for our morning prayer circle, and evidently I said the word "you all" in the circle. And somebody said, Bodhi said to me later, are you Southern? Have you got a little Southern in you? I heard you say "you all" this morning. And I said, I did? I didn't even realize I said that. My former in-laws were from Oklahoma, and they didn't say y'all, they would say you all. But I was never aware that I was actually using that phrase. And several people told me they heard me say it. It was like, have you ever done that where you, later on, somebody says you said or did something and you go, no, that wouldn't have been me. Yeah, it was you. Really? I didn't even hear myself say it. So we are looking this morning at fasting from lack and feasting on abundance. Now, this rabbit, I think, actually has a plethora of carrots, which is really a painful overabundance. But he does have a whole lot of carrots there. This Lenten season with integrity, I'm talking about fasting and feasting. Not necessarily fasting from food, but fasting from ideas, from thoughts, from habits, from beliefs that cause us pain and difficulty. So today I'm talking about fasting from lack and feasting on plenty. And I want to point out to you that two of the major spring holidays that happen during this time are Passover and Easter. And these are actually freedom holidays. Both of them were about claiming life sort of from the jaws of death, really. Finding a spiritual path to walk through the death possibility into greater life. And so I have talked about preparing for a consciousness of freedom then by fasting from fear and feasting on flow. And last week, fasting from struggle and feasting on source. So this week I'm talking about fasting from lack and feasting on plenty or abundance. Now when I'm talking about lack, so this is what the dictionary tells me. It says that if it's a noun, the state of being without or not having enough of something. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence, not enough of the evidence. But at the same time, you can have enough and not recognize it. So that's a consciousness of lack. That's coming from an ideation of lack that sees lack or the possibility of lack even when lack is not present. Are you with me here so far? So it reminds me of the story. Now, I have relatives in Nebraska where, not quite where this terrible flooding is happening, but we have family roots in that area. And I was thinking about the flooding situation, and there's a story about somebody in the midst of pouring rain in a flood, standing out on his front porch as the water rises up to the surface of the porch, and a neighbor comes by in a rowboat and says, get in, let's get out of here, because the water is predicted to rise like many tens of feet, and we need to get out of here. And he says, no, I have faith in God. God is going to save me. And the neighbor argues with him for a minute, but he can't convince him, and so the neighbor goes on. Well, the water continues to rise. The rain continues to fall. Finally, the guy is on the roof above his porch, standing up there, and the rescue units come by in a motorboat, and they say, sir, get in. We're evacuating this neighborhood. It's a mandatory evacuation. This water is going to keep rising. The rain is not stopping. And the man says, no, I have faith in God. God is going to save me. You go right on. And they say, well, it's up to you, sir. It is supposed to be mandatory evacuation. No, God will save me. Okay, best of luck. They go on their way. Well, a few hours go by. He's standing actually on the roof of his house now. The water has taken over his entire home. He's standing up there waiting, and a helicopter flies over. And they drop down one of those things and say, grab onto the cage. We're going to get you out of here. And the guy says, no, thank you very much. I have faith in God. God is going to save me. And they say, okay, sir, good luck. And they go on. Well, the water continues to rise, and he drowns. And when he gets to heaven, he says, God, I am really disappointed in you. I had faith in you. I had the faith that moves mountains. I knew that you were going to save me from that flood, and you didn't do it. And God says, oh, give me a break. I sent 2 boats and a helicopter. What do you want? Sometimes we don't recognize abundance when it shows up for us because we're coming from a different perspective. We're overlaying a perspective of lack onto what's actually available. Does this make sense? I mean, it doesn't make sense that we do it, but it makes sense because we recognize it, right? Our founder, Ernest Holmes, said in some of his writing, by merging mentally and spiritually into the consciousness that there is good enough to go around, we shall overcome the fear of want. And we shall overcome want at the same time, both the fear of want and want. We shall overcome the fear of want, and we shall overcome want at the same time because they are one and the same thing. The thought and the image are but 2 different sides of the same thing. So in order for us to recognize plenty in our lives, which is a sense of enoughness, we have to be looking from a perspective of plenty. And when we're in an experience of lack, it can be difficult to shift gears and look at our lives and the world from the perspective of plenty, right? I mean, we've got the evidence right in front of us, so it's really easy to say, well, yeah, but, or yeah, easy for you to say, or any of those kinds of things that anchor and cement and root that lack in place in our consciousness. And once we have really put down deep roots into that consciousness of lack, it's hard for anything that is communicating something different to us to get through. So we want to, in this season, pull away from ideas and thoughts and behaviors and habits that reinforce a sense of lack, and to move toward a perception of, or a willingness to look for, or an intention, a behavior of finding evidence of plenty in the midst of that. Feasting from lack is an interesting thing. I often say, I don't have enough time. Time is one of my things. And I like this. People often complain about the lack of time when the lack of direction is the real problem. It's a lack of setting out priorities, a lack of operating from a broader perspective that gives us the opportunity to use our time well. Well, that can happen with using anything well. It isn't that there isn't enough of it necessarily, as that we're not actually utilizing it in the best way that we might. So when we indulge in lack thinking, it binds us into cycles of fear and struggle, the 2 things that we were looking at fasting from last week. It binds us into this ongoing cycle of fear and struggle. And we tend to, in that instance, get to feeling like we're not enough, or God's not enough, or something is missing, or we need to do something. There is a hole that needs filling. But that particular hole can't actually be filled because we're looking at the filling of it from the outside, which is reasonable, but it doesn't work that way. It needs to be filled from the inside. And as long as we're trying to fill it from the outside, it will never be enough. We'll never feel full. It's not resolved by getting more or by getting it, whatever we think it is. This story comes from Robert Fulghum's book, Uh-Oh. This is a portion of a story. He says, it all began 7 years ago when Grady moved out of his marriage and out of his house and into a bachelor apartment. Temporarily, or so he said. The apartment was a hole in an old building that had once been pretty classy, but that was now dark, moldy, and depressing. The smell of stale bacon grease pretty well established the ambiance of the building. He's been temporarily there for 7 years. Grady says he's waiting for the future to clarify itself enough so that he can either fix up his present apartment, move into a better set of digs, or maybe move back home with his wife and family, which is a real laugh because his wife divorced him, remarried, sold the old house, and moved to Wyoming 5 years ago. She is out of it, free and clear. There is still some real lunatic optimism loose in Grady's head because he still doesn't quite believe she's gone and it's all over. Grady doesn't come to hasty conclusions. He's lived in this crummy apartment for 7 years, and for every minute of that 7 years, he has been down and out about how awful the apartment makes him feel. He hates to come home to it at night, says it's so ugly in there. His friends agree. Nobody goes over to Grady's house unless he wants to be depressed. The walls are gray. The rug is gray. So's the furniture. He ought to at least paint the walls. He even knows what color. Yellow. 2 gallons would do the living room easy. It would be a start. And that's the heart of the problem. See, if he painted the walls, the furniture wouldn't look good in there, and he'd have to go have new furniture, which means going shopping, and he doesn't have time to go shopping, and interior decorators are too opinionated and trendy, and he doesn't really want one of those. And besides, if he's going to buy new furniture, he might as well move on up to a better apartment. But the kind of apartment he wants is expensive, and he'd have to sign a lease and change his phone number and have his stationery reprinted. And if he's going to go to all that trouble and expense, he might as well buy a house, because real estate is going up, and why wait until he can afford it? But buying takes so much time and such a hassle with real estate agents and banks and credit checks and all that. Besides, what if he falls in love in the meantime and she doesn't like the house? Or maybe she would want kids, and there he'd be owning a house in a neighborhood where the schools are not good, which would mean all the expense of private schools for the children. Or, who knows, his wife may finally decide she made a big mistake leaving him and would want to come back. And there he would be with a house his wife wouldn't want, still having to pay private school tuition for the children of his second marriage. He'd need a therapist before long, and you all know how much that costs. Grady figures a couple gallons of paint could cost him $500,000 in the long run, and who needs that? And I agree. It's a risk, I tell him. When the sun finally starts to die and gets so hot it turns the surface of the earth into boiling rock, his new house will burn down, and he will regret all the time and trouble gone to waste, and his insurance money and deposit money on the non-existent children's non-existent private schools will be down the drain to boot. And in between, there will be carpenter ants, inflation, depression, famine, floods, earthquakes, mold, athlete's foot, and entropy. Painting his apartment living room yellow could lead to the end of the world. Grady seems comforted by the depth of my comprehension of the problem. Grady is stuck. And he thinks getting unstuck and coming unglued are the same thing. Grady also has this scale problem, trying to live in several different time frameworks at the same time. He's trying to live today and tomorrow and next week and next year and next decade and next century all at once, and trying to live in his apartment now and in houses yet to come. I tell him he should just buy himself a cemetery plot now, dig a hole in it, pitch a tent over it, and move in, save all the hassle in between. So we had enough, Grady's friends. Enough of his being stuck, straddling the present and the future. Enough of his moaning and groaning. It was casting a pall over poker games. We decided to shove him headlong into the perils of the next phase of his miserable existence. While he was off skiing one weekend, we bought the lousy paint and repainted his crummy living room, hauled half his furniture to the Goodwill, had his rug shampooed, the windows washed, and bought him a potted plant and 1 goldfish in a bowl so that something alive was in there with him at night. Oh, he appreciated the gesture all right. He even cried about it, took us all out to dinner, and made a great fuss. But he's not happy. It's the paint. The paint's the wrong color. We used medium yellow. Lighter yellow was what he had in mind, And now, if he repaints it, he'll hurt our feelings. And if he doesn't, he'll go crazy living with that yellow. So, Grady's stuck again. We sent his ex-wife a sympathy card. And sent Grady a bill for the damn paint. So, getting stuck is something that happens when we have this overlay of lack consciousness that we're not aware of, because it just seems real. It just seems like the truth. And if we blame God, then we mistrust the infinite. If we blame ourselves, then we're disappointed in ourselves because we haven't done it right. So it all moves around in that cycle again, keeping us stuck in that not enoughness. Now, if we look at the Gospel of John, who was called the beloved disciple, he quotes Jesus as having said, "I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly." Not less, but more. And also, he says a little later, "Hitherto you have asked nothing in my name. Ask that your joy may be full." Well, apparently in Aramaic, the phrase "in my name" actually means "according to my method." So, hitherto you have asked nothing using my method. Use it so that your joy may be full. Well, what was his method? His method was to give thanks, recognizing the infinite first, recognizing that God always hears, and then he made the command for whatever it was he was wanting to have happen next. Out of that place of knowingness and gratitude, he invited it in a compelling way to come forth. That was his method. So he's saying to us, use this method that you might have life and have it more abundantly. And that is the clue that we want to work with when it comes to feasting on plenty. Feasting on plenty is begun with gratitude, with appreciation, with noticing what is. Now, when we feel like our lives are filled with lack, then it can be hard to come up with more than a couple things that we feel is beautiful or that we're grateful for or that there's plenty of. But that's the place. That's the place that we want to be able to do that from. Ernest Holmes wrote in A New Design for Living, "It would be unthinkable to believe that the creative intelligence of the universe could lack anything." Can you imagine God saying, "I'm out of pink. What am I going to do? It's over." No. It would be unthinkable to believe that the creative intelligence of the universe could lack anything, or that it could plan for its creation to lack that which expresses its own being. We are the expression of the beingness of the One. So why would the infinite plan for us to be in lack? He says the divine could only intend good and abundance for its creation, and we need to know that its nature is forever flowing into everything we do. We're not doing it alone. We're doing it with and as that presence. We're letting ourselves be the portal for that presence to manifest more good in the world. And how do we do that? Partly it comes by giving it. And when I say more good, I'm not necessarily talking about stuff. I'm not necessarily talking about money. When I say plenty and abundance, I'm not necessarily talking just about that or just about stuff. I'm talking about plenty of love, plenty of energy, plenty of ideas and creativity, plenty of optimism, plenty of persistence, plenty of delight and appreciation and gratitude. Because when we live from those plenties, abundance finds us irresistible, abundance of all sorts. And it begins to find avenues to come to us because our consciousness is opening up those doors. Are you with me here? This making sense? And so we want to come into a place where we go from not enoughness to enoughness. What is there enough of? What is there plenty of? Well, in spring there are plenty of blossoms. There are plenty of colors. There is plenty of variety in the sky, in the color of the sky, in the shape of the clouds. There's plenty of that. And there is as much of that for you to enjoy and experience and notice as you're willing to. You will not run out. There's plenty. When we want to enter into that place, gratitude is really the key to unlocking the blessings and the grace, because it brings these to where they seem to be absent, and it reveals them where we have failed to notice and appreciate them. You know, somebody wise, and I don't know who, once said, the most important thing about your lot in life is whether you use it for building or parking. And too many of us are parked when it's really time for us to get up and build, get up and create, get up and move into the enoughness that we are, trusting that whatever God has endowed us with, it's enough for what we need to be and do right now. And when we need more, more will reveal itself to us, in us or around us. It happens out of that need to know or need to be. When that need begins to emerge in us, then opportunities for that need to be filled through us or for us begin to show up. And we can ask ourselves, when was a time that I felt grateful, that I felt plentiful, that I felt enoughness, that I was enough, that God was enough? When did I last feel like that? When have I most felt like that? And what was I focusing on at that time? Where was my attention? Where was my energy? Where was my heart at that time? And bringing our trust back to the flow. There isn't anything in life that doesn't flow. Everything flows and moves all the time. Nothing stays absolutely static. Nothing. There is nothing we experience in form at all that stays the same. Everything changes and shifts and morphs and grows. Everything. So flow is a given. Now, how we want to trust that flow, trust our own intuition, trust Spirit's guidance, trust that the next step will get clear, and when we get there, we'll be able to take it. And so we can have an abundance of ideas in this process. We can have an abundance of flow, certainly, an abundance of a greater sense of enoughness, and an abundance of gratitude for all of that. And I want to share this man's story with you. This is Jimmy Yin, as a young man and as an old man. And Jimmy Yin is a remarkable fellow. A jury of distinguished scholars and scientists, including Albert Einstein and Orville Wright, thought enough of Jimmy Yin to vote him one of the top 10 modern revolutionaries of the 20th century. What he did was to teach Chinese peasants to read. Now, what made that so amazing was that for 4,000 years, reading and writing in China was only done by scholars. Everybody knew, the peasants, including the peasants themselves, that peasants were incapable of learning. That thoroughly ingrained cultural belief was Jimmy Yin's first, quote, impossible barrier. The agreement in an entire huge culture that something that was lacking was a fact, was the truth. The second barrier was the Chinese language itself, consisting of 40,000 characters, each signifying a different word. And the third barrier was the lack of technology and good roads. How could Jimmy Yin teach 350 million peasants in China? Impossible odds. An impossibly huge goal. And yet, he had almost attained it when he was forced by communism to leave his country. Did he give up? No. He learned from defeat and expanded his goal to teach the rest of people in developing countries to read. Practical reading programs like the ones he invented in China started pumping out literate people like a gushing oil well in the Philippines, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Kenya, Colombia, Guatemala, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Ghana, India. People became literate. For the first time in their genetic history, they had access to the accumulated knowledge of the human race. I'd like you to consider for a moment how narrow your world would be if you'd never learned to read, and there was no access to radio or television. What was the secret of Jimmy Yen's success? He found a real need and found in himself a strong desire to meet that need. He took action. He tried to do something about it, even though it seemed impossible. He worked long hours. He started with only what he had in front of him and gradually took on more and more. The English author Thomas Carlyle has said, "Our main business is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand." That's what Jimmy Yen did. He started out teaching a few peasants to read with no desks, no pens, no money, no overhead projectors. He started from where he found himself and did what was clearly at hand. That's all we need to do. Start now. Start here. And do what clearly lies at hand. And this is how we shift from a consciousness of lack to a consciousness of plenty. Namaste. Thank you. Practitioners, our licensed practitioners, who surround the room for a time of prayer. And I'm just going to invite you to place your hands over your heart. And as you breathe, I'll invite you to close your eyes and notice your breathing and your heartbeat. This is an internal representation, a reminder, an activity of continuous flow of good, a continuous response to the physical body's need for oxygen and sustenance and removal of waste and flow. It's happening for you uniquely in this body right here and right now. So all of us together, all of us in this circle of practitioners, are going to enter into prayer aloud together for all of us now to awaken to plenty and welcome it. In this moment right here and now, I turn my attention to the abundance provided for me, knowing that God is an ever-flowing and infinite source of good. This presence never withholds, never lacks, never doubts, never has any offenses or concerns, except to be fully, freely, abundantly, joyously, creatively us. I know this is true for me and every person in this place and every one of our dear ones, and for all creation everywhere. We are the only begotten living beingness, expressed as the offspring of God, and therefore wholeness and flow and abundance are right where we are right now. We don't need to look outside of ourselves to begin to make it welcome in our experience. It finds its way to us now. I claim this with great gratitude for every single person here, and I know that this is the truth of who we are already. So with gratitude, I send this word to do its work in the creative law of mind and spirit, knowing that it is already accomplished in the mind and the heart of God, where it always was the truth. And so it is. And together we say, and so it is.